Good afternoon and welcome. As you know by now, Unlock the Stock is designed for retail investors to gain access to corporate management and to get to know them and their companies a little better. This episode is sponsored by Easy Equities, the platform that helps you to grow and protect your wealth. You can invest in local and international shares, property unit trusts, crypto, bonds, and actively managed ETFs. Plus, you get access to Easy Protect Life, insurance, and easy credit lending to back your financial journey. Today, we really are happy to welcome to Unlock the Stock for the first time a new entrant that is going to be listed on the stock exchange in latter part of the year, ASP Isotopes. We're joined by Paul Mann, the CEO, who will take you through a presentation shortly. We're also joined by Johannes Himman of Value Capital, who is the sole corporate advisor to ASP and is bringing them to the JSE. Unlock the Stock is only possible with our technology partner, Lumi Global. Please visit their website at lumiglobal.com to learn more about their various online AGM and investor presentation solutions. Our host today will be the Finance Ghost, who will lead the Q&A session. Before we start, there are just a few housekeeping notes. Paul will take you through a presentation which will be followed by a Q&A. You can post your questions by typing them into the Q&A box, which will be at the bottom of your screen. The event is being recorded and will be available on the Unlock the Stock YouTube channel next week, with about another 40 videos that you can have a look at. You will see an email address when we start the Q&A session, which is aspi@valuecapital.co.za. And if you want to be added to the ASP Isotopes distribution list or have any questions about the upcoming listing, please reach out to Value Capital. Paul, on that note, I am ready for you to share your screen with us and take us through the presentation, please.
Fantastic. So I'm hopefully now sharing my screen and you can see it. If you just confirm that'd be great.
There we go. It's up.
Fantastic. Okay, so first of all, thank you all for your interest. It's great to be here and to meet everyone. And I'll take you through our corporate slide deck first, and then we'll have any questions at the end, which is great. So we're a NASDAQ listed company, so we have the usual forward-looking disclaimers. If you could look at our SEC filings for a complete set of disclosures and have you, that'd be fantastic, and just read these forward-looking statements. So who are we and what are we? So my career is basically been more in finance than it has been in managing companies. I actually studied chemical engineering at Cambridge about 30 years ago, and then I spent about 25 years in finance. I spent 11 years at Morgan Stanley, where I was an analyst in healthcare and then in chemicals, first in London, then in New York. And I spent about 5 years working for Soros Fund Management, where I put investments into healthcare and chemicals companies. And then I ran a long short book at Highbridge Capital, where I managed a portfolio of stocks in healthcare and chemicals. So I spent my entire career really looking at healthcare and chemicals companies. And during those years, some of the best shorts I found were companies that needed isotopes. Companies like Mallinckrodt and Cardinal Health. Obviously, Mallinckrodt went bust, but the supply chain in isotopes is so challenging. They often missed quarters and missed numbers, and you could predict fairly predictably when they were going to miss numbers. And so in 2020, I met a group of South African scientists who developed ways to enrich isotopes, and I immediately thought this could actually solve a lot of the problems the companies I've been investing in and analyzing and struggle to supply. I also recognize there's a lot of new isotopes coming to market that the world would need. And so we ended up acquiring our assets out of Business Rescue in September 2021. So we acquired 2 incomplete plants, about 9 scientists. And since then, we've grown our business to 153 researchers and scientists down here, engineers down here in South Africa now. And of 150, and actually when we acquired the assets, the 9 scientists, the average age was probably 60. The average age of 153 people now is probably 30. So my job was to take the brains from these scientists and transplant them into a younger generation who can take this technology forwards and make the company grow longer term. We've built 3 manufacturing plants here in South Africa, and all 3 are in the process of becoming commercial going to commercial production right now. They've all started up during the first quarter, and we'll talk more about those in a minute. Now, we have three verticals in our company. ASP Isotopes, which is the bit listed on NASDAQ, and our goal is to list on Johannesburg at some point this year. While our investors are largely based in the United States, the heartbeat of this company is here in South Africa. Of our 153 employees, 149 are based here. I'm here today. I spend a lot of time here, and so our goal is to list on Johannesburg so much, so the local population can benefit from what we're creating down here. So that's ASP Isotopes in the middle, and that's built three manufacturing plants, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then to the left, you see PET Labs. And so PET Labs is a supplier of radioisotopes into South Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa, actually. It's the leading supplier of PET isotopes into Sub-Saharan Africa. And we in the process of expanding that business greatly. Goal is to triple that over the next years for about $10 million of investment. And we're pretty good stewards of our assets. I think we're excellent stewards of our assets. Actually, we give away all of our drugs to children under the age of 18 free of charge. Our view is that if a child has got cancer, parents shouldn't worry about how they finance the treatment of that child. So that's kind of PET Labs. And that's based here in Pretoria as well. And to the right, you see Quantum Leap Energy, and that business is more of a research phase. And that's going to focus on the nuclear fuels of the future, specifically high-assay, low-enriched uranium and lithium-6. And we've signed an MOU or term sheet with TerraPower, that's Bill Gates' company, and we've signed an MOU of NECSA, the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, to build a nuclear fuel plant at Pelindaba here in South Africa. And we're spinning that business out later on this year as a separate entity. So if you have a share of ASPI today, you'll have some shares of ASPI and QLE. When we spin that out. And our goal is to spin that out in the second half of this year after the listing on the JSE. So we operate in three three industries, really: medical, semiconductors, and nuclear energy. We'll talk about all of those in the next 20 minutes or so. So here are our targets for the year, our goals for the year. Our goal is basically to get the company to free cash flow, or certainly the ASPI part of the company to where it's free cash flow positive. And so that means these three plants are in the process of starting up at the moment, and start building more plants to create more isotopes. So I guess what I start with normally is, what is an isotope? Because most people may have forgotten from their days back at school. So when you think about different elements, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, silicon, for example, they're very different elements. They've got different positions on the periodic table. There are different numbers of protons in the nucleus, and that derives their chemical properties. So hydrogen is very different to carbon, very different to oxygen, very different to silicon. And you can separate them by chemical means. Some of them are solids, some of them are gases. The gases liquefy at very different temperatures and have different reactive properties. So they're easy to separate. But same elements also have isotopes, and they're different numbers of neutrons inside the nucleus. And you take carbon, for example. Carbon has three semi-stable isotopes: carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. And when you think about, if I think about carbon, let's take a bag of charcoal, for example. A kilo of charcoal is probably $1 a kilo. A kilo of carbon's $1 a kilo. When we enrich the carbon-14, so we just have the carbon-14 isotope, that's worth $24 million a kilo. Let's take silicon, for example. So silicon has three isotopes: 28, 29, and 30. And silicon is used widely in semiconductors to make microchips and semiconductors. And the 29 isotope does not conduct electricity. So if we can remove that 29 isotope and just have the 28, we increase the conductivity of that semiconductor greatly. And that allows us to make next generation semiconductors. So same example of silicon: a bag of sand, which is basically silicon, is probably $1 a kilo. A kilo of silicon-28 enriched to 99.995% is $500,000 a kilo. So our industry is about taking these very basic elements and converting them into very special materials that the world needs to enable specific technologies. So why is the supply chain so fragile? This chart here kind of shows it all, really. Russia dominates the isotope supply chain. Every government views isotopes as being critical materials, critical to national security and everyday living. And this is what's made me interested in terms of getting these assets and turning them into a business. Now, we have two technologies down here in South Africa that we acquired. Two technologies we've announced, we've got others we haven't announced. And the first is the aerodynamic separation process. And this is similar to the process that South Africa used to make its nuclear weapons back in the 1970s and 80s. It's a stationary wall centrifuge, and we take a tube and we spin a gas inside the tube very quickly. It approaches the speed of sound, actually. And we send it through various flow directors and nozzles, and our scientists have engineered and designed those. And we're able to separate isotopes by mass. Now, the advantage of that process is, it's very capital inexpensive to build these plants versus a traditional centrifuge. Tens of millions rather than billions. Much smaller footprint. You can start them, stop them, much more operational flexibility. And we can enrich light isotopes as well as heavy isotopes. The traditional centrifuge that Russia uses, you can't enrich light isotopes. So the silicon-28, carbon-14, you can't really enrich those very well in large centrifuges. You think about, if I've got a bowl of soup and a spoon, if I stir that soup, you create a vortex inside. If I use air and stir a spoon inside a bowl of air, nothing really happens. For a centrifuge, you need mass to make it work. And our process doesn't need as much mass. Actually, the lighter the isotope, the more efficient our process. The second process we have is quantum enrichment, which uses lasers. So we vaporize a metal, pass it through a laser beam, and that puts a positive charge onto one of the isotopes. We can collect that using a charge collector plate. This is a very simplistic diagram of what we actually do, but that's essentially kind of how we do it. And we've built two ASP plants, one at CSIR in Pretoria, the other at Kudersport near Pretoria. And then we've got one quantum enrichment plant at the CSIR in Pretoria. And all of our technologies are classified by the IAEA as dual-use technology, so they can be used for nefarious things as well as nice things. So our plants come under comprehensive safeguard agreements with the IAEA, and they can inspect with just 2 hours warning, and they come twice a year to inspect. And locally, we're regulated by the DEE, the Department of Energy and Electricity, which has been very helpful to us. Here's a picture of our carbon-14 plant in CSIR in Pretoria. And you'll see at the left, you see the separated elements. In the middle, you see the light element recovery. In the right, you see the heavy element recovery. So to summarize, our plants are cost-effective, modular, scalable, and very environmentally friendly. There's no nuclear waste. So let's talk about the first market opportunity we have. That's nuclear medicine. Nuclear medicine is growing at a hell of a rate right now. You have double digits kind of growth. Lots of new treatments coming to market that need radiotherapeutics. And this slide here really shows the symbiotic relationship between ASP Isotopes and PET Labs. PET Labs' role is to take a stable isotope and convert it into a radioisotope you can use to treat a patient. And so on the left, you see some of the stable isotopes we hope to produce at ASP Isotopes over the next several years. And at the right, you'll see what we hope PET Labs will turn them into to treat patients. So our first product in medical isotopes is ytterbium-176. And Novartis has just launched a new cancer drug called Pluvicto. And it's a radiotheranostic, and it uses lutetium-177. So when you think about old days when we used chemotherapy, the goal there was to kill the cancer before you killed the patient. You're infecting the whole body. Now, what this does, it takes a radioactive particle, directs it to the tumor just to kill the tumor. Great technology, fantastic survival we're seeing in these patients with end-stage prostate cancer. But to make lutetium-177, you need ytterbium-176. And so actually NTP, which is Nexa's radiotherapeutics division, makes lutetium-177 today in the Sapphire reactor at Pelindaba. And so we'll likely sell them ytterbium-176 later on this year. Now, the problem with ytterbium-176, the sole supplier to date has been Russia. There's been a shortage of it. During the clinical trial, 5% of patients died because they couldn't make the drug. So our ytterbium-176 plant is based at CSIR in Pretoria. We started producing commercial samples a few weeks ago, about a month ago, and we aim to have those commercial samples out to customers over the summer so they can start testing it and then can start ordering commercial quantities. We think our plant has capability of producing about 1 kilo a year based on the initial results we're seeing. And we have actually identified about 2 kilos of demand for this isotope from various customers around the world. So we're already looking at ways to expand the capacity of this plant and bring more product to market. And this plant was a real, it kind of shows the success we've had here in South Africa. We started the construction of this plant in January 2024 with a goal of completing it in September of 2025. We actually finished the plant in August 2024, started commissioning in sort of September, October 2024. So we actually managed to accelerate this plant by about 9 months, which was fantastic. The team did an amazing job of building this plant on time. Second, another isotope we're likely to start building a plant for soon is zinc-68. We'll use quantum for that as well. And all these new cancer drugs require gallium-68 to diagnose them. And the best way to make gallium-68 is by putting zinc-68 into a cyclotron. There's a huge shortage of zinc-68 right now. And so we've already started the procurement for the components for this plant, and we'll probably announce shortly where that plant's going to be and the sizing and so forth. But the goal is to have this up and running by the end of the year. That's our stretch objective. And we started the procurement for this in about November of last year. So hopefully we'll achieve that. The molybdenum 100 is a much larger, longer-term opportunity. The world right now, when you have a SPECT scan done, so you've got cancer or broken bone or something, use technetium-99. That's the workhorse of nuclear medicine. That's made from molybdenum-99, which is a half-life of 66 hours. So you're shipping this molybdenum-99 around the world. It's losing half its value every 2.5 days. It's been a very challenging supply chain, as I said earlier. So our goal is to try over the next several years is to switch people from using Moly-99 to Moly-100. It's a huge market opportunity, but let's remember the healthcare market moves more like a glacier rather than a river. So, I think let's make sure that, expectations are set. This is going to be a very slow process. And then carbon-14, this is a picture of our carbon-14 plant. And we constructed a carbon-14 plant here in South Africa. Unlike the ytterbium, which was accelerated, this was delayed a little bit. So we built the plant by 2023, and we started commissioning it. Our feedstock got delayed in Canada. So we've signed a take-or-pay contract with a Canadian customer for this. And the Canadian customer is responsible for supplying the feedstock, and then we enrich it, and then we send it back to them. So they had about a 9-month delay in getting their feedstock. It got stuck in Tennessee in the United States. And so that's been quite frustrating, I must say. But anyway, we have some feedstock now. We haven't got quite enough, but we've got some, and we've started the enrichment of carbon-14 at CSIR in Pretoria. The take-or-pay contract is for a minimum of $2.5 million a year. Yeah, this is a very small niche market, potentially $10 million a year, that kind of size. And we have a $2 million bank letter of guarantee supporting that $2.5 million contract from the Canadian customer. So it's a small market, but it's nice to be able to take what was for the predecessor company, the assets we bought out of Business Rescue, a pilot plant, and turn it into a commercial plant to produce revenues, because we're more interested in producing revenues than we are scientific data. So this kind of shows our timeline and expectations and our aspirations for medical isotopes. So semiconductors is one of the more exciting areas investors are excited about. So as I mentioned earlier, if you can remove the silicon-29 from silicon, you can increase the conductivity of the semiconductor and make it operate thousands of fold faster. We've built a plant at Krugersport. It's a multi-isotope plant, very flexible. It's going to focus on silicon-28 initially. And we've signed 2 contracts, one with a large US-based semiconductor company and one with a large global industrial gas company. And we have about 3 or 4 more customers wanting to sign contracts fairly soon for silicon-28. And this plant started commercial production in March, and we hope to ship our first product to customers in June of this year. We're enriching it to 99.995%. And the chemical purity of this is 99.9999% chemically pure. And that's a hell of an achievement for our scientists to be able to, our engineers to build a plant that can do that. It shows the engineering talent we have here in South Africa. There's also a lot of interest in other isotopes to enable next generation semiconductors. So depleted germanium-73, so we'll enrich the 70 and 72 side of germanium. And we expect to supply that this year as well. After it turns silicon-28, we can do germanium in our silicon plant as well. It's quite a flexible plant. And then we have quantum computing companies that need ytterbium-171, barium-137, and the entire semiconductor company industry needs more helium-3. That's currently going at about $120 million a kilo, and we aim to start producing that in 2026, 2027. That's very excited about that, and so are the semiconductor companies. So one of our processes, ASP, uses quite a lot of energy. Quantum doesn't use much energy. And so obviously South Africa has a slight problem with energy, or it's an unfortunate position with energy, that energy prices are both quite high and unreliable. We have a 1.5 megawatts of diesel generation capacity, actually 1.8 megawatts of diesel generation capacity sitting outside our Kudersport facility. And through most of 24 and 23, we're burning through thousands of dollars of diesel to keep our operations going. Obviously, things have done a lot better in the last 12 months. Minister Ramakopa is doing an amazing job as energy minister. And so one of our goals is to move to Iceland to make ourselves more geographically distributed, more geographically diverse. And obviously in Iceland, the energy bubbles out of the ground, and so it's extremely cheap. And this will reduce our cash operating costs by about 80%. And our goal then is to make it so we can produce silicon-28 at about $20 a gram and still make an 80% gross margin. When you think about it, my iPhone has about 5 grams of silicon in it. And at $500 a gram, which is what we're selling it for from Kudersport, people aren't going to pay $2,500 for a slightly faster iPhone, but they may well pay an extra $100 for a slightly faster iPhone. So our goal is to drive down our production costs so we can push all our isotopes into new inventions and more consumer kind of electronics. So this is actually one of the more exciting parts of the company, Quantum Leap Energy, or certainly a lot of investors are excited by nuclear energy right now. It's actually our lowest return on capital business, but it is the largest commercial opportunity that we have ahead of us. And the problem is it's fairly well known. Over the next 25 years, the world needs to double the amount of electricity whilst keeping carbon emissions flat. Most companies recognize that solar and wind are great when you have wind and when you have solar, but if you don't, it's kind of a problem. So 24 countries have said they're going to try and triple the amount of nuclear energy by 2050. I personally think they're going to struggle to do that, but that's the goal. And in our view, the future of nuclear power is the small modular reactor. And interesting enough, these actually came from South Africa. South Africa was a leader in this kind of program 15 years ago. South Africa had the Pebble Bed Modular Reactor, the PBMR program, the Pebble Bed Modular Reactor. They shut that down in about 2013. And Cam Garfassian, the CEO of X Energy, flew over to South Africa, picked up quite a few of the scientists and took them back to America to create X Energy, which is now a multi-billion-dollar company. So South Africa was just maybe 10 years ahead of the game and ahead of its time. But a small modular reactor is exactly what it says. It's small and it's modular. It's cheaper to build. When you think about what made a car cheap, it was the Ford Model T, taking car production to production line economics. And this takes nuclear power to production line economics and should really drive down the cost of building a reactor. When you think about the problem of a reactor, traditional nuclear reactor takes 10 to 20 years to build and $20+ billion to build. They're typically very late. You have to put them in the middle of nowhere, far away from human civilizations. So you have to put a transmission grid to get that energy to the population. The exclusion zone around Koeberg is 6 kilometers. The exclusion zone around TerraPower's Natrium is a few hundred meters. So a number of companies involved in this space. I've mentioned X Energy already. TerraPower is Bill Gates' company. Oklo is Sam Altman's company. And then there's Rolls-Royce. So we feel this is the future of nuclear power. The problem for these reactors, they all require a new form of uranium called HALEU, high-assay, low-enriched uranium. And traditionally, for nuclear reactors, uranium is enriched from 0.71% to sort of 3.5% to 5%. And HALEU's enriched to up to 19.75%, so it's much higher energy density. And the problem is there's no supplier of HALEU globally other than Rosatom, the Russian government. And our understanding is it's no longer available. That would involve down-blending weapons-grade uranium, and that's no longer on the cards. So most of these SMRs have been delayed by a number of years. TerraPower just delayed the startup of theirs by 2 years because of the lack of availability of HALEU. And there's no Western supplier of it. So our goal is to build a domestic supplier HALEU from South Africa over the next few years. Now, we've got a number of technologies to enrich isotopes. We're actually favoring quantum enrichment for HALEU. And the reason for that is because the enrichment factor is the greatest. So look at the selectivity. This is how how much efficiency you have in the enrichment process. So gaseous diffusion, which was used back in the 1940s, an alpha of 1.003, huge capital cost, huge energy needs, very inefficient. In the 1970s and 80s, we kind of moved to centrifuges. That's enrichment factor of 1.15, much better. And to the right, you see a number of laser-based approaches, AVLIS, SILEX, and quantum. They're much higher. And quantum, we feel, is our preferred way of doing it. It has the highest selectivity. And here's some kind of technical reasons why, but essentially, unlike other approaches, we can ionize atoms that aren't in the ground state. We get a much higher enrichment factor, and we use a lot less energy. And we've also employed some of the best scientists in the world at Stellenbosch and WITS to do the spectroscopy and the beam shaping and things that haven't been possible 20, 30 years ago. And the result is that, here's some real world experience of quantum enrichment. And so this is lithium-6, lithium-7. It came from South Africa's weapons program back in the day. And you'll see the lithium-6 naturally is at 7%. That's in the top chart. And after one pass through our laser, the lithium-6 is over 90%. So our enrichment factor is 112. For ytterbium, we're seeing well over 100 right now in our ytterbium plant. And we've experienced enrichment factor up to 678 for some isotopes. And so it's the most powerful way of enriching, in our opinion. So, nuclear fuel supply chain has always been challenged. And right now, we're seeing extreme stress. If you look, most components of the nuclear fuel market are up 5-fold plus in the last 3 years. There's been no investment in this industry for 30 years. Suddenly you go to growth rather than decline, and there's no spare capacity. Combine that with global geopolitical tensions, and it's a real problem. So, and also I would add, it's very rare to see a commodity increase in price 5-fold more and see zero supply side response. And that's actually what we've seen. That's why we're excited at Quantum Leap to kind of be that supply side response. We can do it much cheaper than anyone else can, and quicker than anyone else can. So for HALEU, when people were designing these SMRs, the thought process was that the fuel would be about less than $7,000 a kilo. The reality is now it's been $20,000 a kilo. That means a lot of these really small reactors simply aren't going to be economically viable, and even the larger ones are going to be much lower returns than people were previously anticipating. I think one of the reasons why TerraPower has signed a term sheet with us is because we feel that we can produce very cheap HALEU. So we believe that we can take depleted nuclear waste and convert it into HALEU. And that would really reduce the cost of HALEU dramatically. And when you think about solving the climate crisis, it's not US that needs more nuclear reactors. It's not Western Europe, but they do, but that's not going to solve the climate crisis. We need to get nuclear reactors into the emerging markets, into the developing world, where there's a lot of coal being used today. And in order to do that, nuclear energy has to trade at a discount to hydrocarbon-based energy, not at a premium. And in many of these developing countries, people struggle to afford 7 meals a week. And so we can't expect them to pay for the problem in the West. And so if we can really drive cheaper energy into those markets via cheaper reactors and cheaper fuel, then that's a way we can potentially solve the climate crisis. And so when you look at, just to summarize, I guess, we have pretty consistent operational performance. We built three manufacturing plants here in South Africa in 3 years. We have a pretty tight rein over our employees to get this stuff done on time. Multiple secular and geopolitical tailwinds driving the growth in this industry. And I say we have proven proprietary technology developed here in South Africa, and that's why we're very happy to be here. So I guess now I'll stop there and take any Q&A, and hopefully there's lots of questions from the audience.
Wow, thanks so much, Paul. That's fantastic. I'm not even going to hesitate to hand you over to the finance ghost, because I think he's got a couple of questions, and we really look forward to this discussion. Over to you, Ghost.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Paul, for this super interesting presentation. I'm certainly no chemical engineer myself, so lots and lots of interesting stuff in here. I was half expecting you to do a Tony Stark Iron Man vibe with a red suit, but it was a somewhat more stylish jacket that you chose, so well done. I just want to give some context to those who have attended. So you need to send me your questions via DM. I can also see from the DMs that we obviously have some people on the call who are already very familiar with your business, possibly international investors. I just want to give context to Unlock the Stock. The primary goal of today is to improve familiarity with the ASP Isotopes business with the South African investor audience. Super happy to ask some of the more detailed questions, but there are going to be quite a few high-level ones. This is not meant to be, a full-blown sell-side analyst kind of conversation, because this is aimed at primarily the South African audience. But thank you for being here, and I will try and ask what I can. Paul, somewhere that I'd like to start is you mentioned that this business was bought out of Business Rescue. I'm just curious, was that a commercialization failure? Was it a technology issue? Where have you had to really make improvements to actually turn this into something viable? And where do you think the risk lies in terms of an outcome like that potentially happening again? Is it still very much a technology risk, or do you see it more now as commercialization risks? I think it just helps people understand the risk spectrum they're looking at here on something that they don't really have much familiarity with from a technology perspective.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So, the last 30 years we've been in a isotope bear market, I would say. Challenging supply side, but also there's been little investment. There's been no need to invest in nuclear fuel. There's been no need to produce silicon-28 or that kind of stuff. So there hasn't been that much investment in this industry over the last 20 or 30 years. I guess, the scientists and the predecessors who owned the assets, Business Rescue, great scientists, but potentially not best business people. They make some pretty strange decisions in terms of the way they run the business. I guess what we've brought to this is, we're very much more focused on commercial stuff rather than science. We need to sell products to make money. We're very driven and focused on producing commercial products. We have a very tight rein on our employees. We work them very hard, and so it's a challenge, but we kind of got here. Our chief operating officer, as our chief operating officer says, he's to manage a group of bookies, you've got to be bigger than them, stronger than them, drink more than them, eat more than them, shoot more than them. He's 6'5" and weighs 350 pounds. He brings the second row mentality into the boardroom and drives our workers to really get this stuff done on time, on budget. If there's a problem with a supply chain, he will then go and deal with it and get it solved. So he's we've got a great relationship with our employees. They all own a lot of stock as well in the company. Hopefully they're going to make a lot of money from that. And so again, we have a very loyal group of employees who really work hard and enjoy being part of a public company. So, I guess changing mindset of how to run a business is just one thing. In terms of the technology readiness level and what's going on there, so our two ASP plants are operational, produce a commercial product. Our ytterbium plant is producing commercial samples right now. So in terms of the technology risk versus commercial risk, we're kind of at the commercial stage now. We expect to ship commercial product during the first half of the year.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. That's helpful. And then just in terms of these scientists, obviously this is very much based in South Africa. Are these South African scientists? Are you having to find talent around the world and bring them here? Are you finding that you have good access to scientists within the South African context? And if you do go and open something in Iceland, for example, do you think that some of the South African scientists would maybe move across and staff that up, or would you be able to find European scientists?
Yeah, so a lot of questions there. If I missed one out, please remind me. So, we would not have been able to build this business in the United States. It's shocking that South Africa has 4 universities that offer nuclear engineering and related activities. The Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy, has just sent 30 American students to Northwest University to learn nuclear engineering at the cost of $1 million per student, because those skills are not available in the US. It's absolutely shocking. So of 153 employees, 149 are South African. The other 4 are non-South African. We have no problems recruiting down here. We hire the best graduates every year. Our head of R&D, Dr. Alexandra, she used to be the lecturer in distillation and separation processes at University of Pretoria. So she phones around all the professors each year. Who's your best mechanical engineer? Who's your best electrical engineer? Who's your best chemical engineer? Who's your best nuclear engineer? And you'll kind of work for us. We pay the highest wages, I think, and we give everyone equity in the company. I learned very early that if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So let's pay the highest wages and get the best employees. Actually, the most expensive engineer is a bad engineer. So get the best. So we've got a great talented group of people down here. And also they get equity in the company too. I learned early in my career, when I spent 2 years working at Procter & Gamble, it's really important to have everyone invested in the business. I used to go to the canteen to get a burger or fish and chips, and there was a gentleman in there, probably 60 years old, who served burgers and fish and chips. And he was the best and happiest burger flipper I've ever met in my life. Why? Because he owned Procter & Gamble stock. He'd worked there 30 years, was also the richest burger flipper I've ever met in my life. So I learned very early, you have to give people upside in what they're doing and ownership in what they're doing. So we have probably a very different philosophy to many other South African companies and how we do things. But that's what we do, and that's how we've been successful down here.
Fantastic. That's very helpful.
Iceland. So
yes, yeah.
Our plants are modulars. We're going to build the plants down here, put them on a boat and ship them to Iceland. So there won't be a lot of construction activity taking place in Iceland. We'd expect to send some of our South African scientists up to Iceland to work there. A lot of them are very keen to go there and work there, and supplement it with local engineers and plant workers as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Last question on the scientists. This big uptick in the number of people you have in the business, is that something that gets you to market faster on a smaller number of isotopes, or are you going wider and trying to develop more products with this bigger team? What is the sort of approach? Is it about commercializing fewer things, or is it about having this pipeline of product into the future?
It's both. Also, we recognize that we've only announced 2 technologies to the market that we have today. We've actually got a lot more technologies we're working on to enrich isotopes. And there hasn't been much research in this industry for 30 years. And so when you think about the new mathematical modeling and computer simulations you can do now versus 30 years ago, think about different materials and things like that. It's I think we can do an awful lot more in this industry. I think we just literally just scraped the surface. So we've got quite a big R&D team doing that. And then our engineering team, we fabricate and engineer most of the components ourselves, which again reduces supply chain procurement problems. So our Silicon-28 plant has about 50,000 components in it. I'm going to guess that we manufactured 40,000 of them, fabricated 40,000 ourselves in our fabrication workshop, where we have a number of technicians who can design and manufacture components to exceptionally high accuracy. So our machines can drill to 10 microns. When you think about what 10 microns means, if you take a piece of paper and split it in 10 times, that's 10 microns. So so that's kind of what we do. That's how we build our plants quickly, and we need a workforce to do that.
Great. Moving on to logistics and supply chain. I'm just thinking about this place in Pretoria, effectively the half-life of these products. How does this work in terms of the stuff getting transported to the customers around the world? I mean, South Africa, even European investors will know South Africa is very good at rugby, not so good at logistics and infrastructure. You would have surely experienced this yourself. You spoke about some of the electricity. How do you mitigate that when you're producing this stuff at the end of the day in Pretoria?
So, I said, building plants, a lot of the components are made here in Pretoria. And we have a pretty good logistics team that is able to overcome a lot of these challenges. As a US company with a UK subsidiary, we can often order equipment through our US subsidiary or UK subsidiary and then FedEx it down here, which often saves a lot of time. And I say, Bobby, our COO, is very good at bullying suppliers to get them on time and make things happen quicker. Logistics is a problem. In terms of shipping our finished products, that's less of a problem, actually. So carbon-14 we can ship on a plane in the form of carbon dioxide or barium carbonate salt. So that's fairly trivial. Something like Silicon-28 is not allowed on a plane. It has to go on a boat. So that's a much longer process. But again, we shouldn't get surprised by what we need. We should be able to order it in a lot of time, so it's here on time.
Yeah, it's a complicated supply chain without a doubt. There's been a couple of questions in my DMs just around your sort of barriers to entry, patents? Like, what is actually protecting you here? What is the moat of this business, other than years and years of R&D, which I think is clear? But what other protections do you have? Presumably, there could be other companies in the world on a similar R&D journey, right now. So I think just helping potential investors understand what the moat is of this business.
Yeah, and there probably are other companies doing research into what we're doing, and so we have to be first to market, have the lowest cash cost of production. So that's why we're going to Iceland. In terms of patents and barriers to entry, our processes aren't patented. We wouldn't be allowed to get patents on our process. They all come under, they're all classified as dual use technology by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. So all our plants come under comprehensive safeguard agreements with the IAEA, and that means, for example, there's no telephone lines in or computer lines in or out. Every night, all the hard disks get put inside a safe, inside a second safe, inside a metal room. Our facilities are surrounded by metal bars, so cars can't break through them and gain entry to them. Anyone visiting our site has to be cleared by the Non-Proliferation Council before entering, so that takes a little bit of time. And only 9 people have access to the technology in the company, and I'm not one of them. Only South African citizens are allowed access to the technology, so I'm not allowed access to them. So I'm not allowed in the R&D labs by myself. I have to be accompanied by one of the people who've been cleared to have access to the technology. So it's very, very tightly controlled who has access to it. It's not allowed to cross international borders, we'll be told. So actually, when we build our plants in Iceland, no Icelandic person will know what's going on inside the plant. Only South Africans will. They can operate the plant, but they can't see what's actually going on in terms of the control technology. So there's a lot of protections in place and that kind of stuff to prevent the material being, to prevent people stealing our technology and our knowledge. But obviously, it's not, we can't just rely on that. So by having the lowest cash cost of production is also very critical. Very critical indeed. I spent a long time trading commodity chemicals, and there's always a cost curve to producing a chemical, and you've got to be at the bottom quartile.
Fascinating. Thank you. That was really interesting. There's a few questions around CapEx and your potential capital raising. The shelf offering of $100 million has come up in a couple of questions. So I'm just going to let you kind of just talk to that to the extent you can. What does your sort of CapEx roadmap look like and funding requirements?
Yeah, so we finished December 31 with $60 million of cash on our balance sheets. We raised about 100 at the start of the company. We spent about 40 in our first, call it, sort of 4 years of operations and building 3 plants. So we've got $60 million left. We need no capital to get our first 3 plants operational, working and producing profits. The money's been spent already. Obviously, to expand, we need capital. And a laser plant here in South Africa, less than $5 million. So less than $5 million of capex for your terbium plant, or a nickel 64 plant, or a zinc 68 plant. A larger plant in Iceland is more like sort of $30 million, 30. And of that $30 million, about 15 of it is for compressors. 7.5 is for things like heat exchangers, control systems, valves, stuff that's you use as collateral for a loan. 7.5 of it is controlled and nuclear technology you clearly can't use as collateral for loans. So we expect to put quite a lot of debt into the Icelandic plants. We also expect the customers to contribute significantly with the capex for those plants. So we feel pretty comfortable with our capital position. I know we've never had such a strong balance sheet. In terms of the $100 million shelf, very few NASDAQ companies don't have a shelf outstanding. It's just good corporate governance. And so we filed that a couple of weeks ago, and we expect it to go effective when it goes effective. And it's just good housekeeping, basically.
Great. I'm going to move on to
I would also add that we think very seriously about return on capital and return on invested capital. I'm the largest shareholder in the company, so every dollar we spend, 10 cents of it is mine, and 25 cents of it is management's. So, we focus very much on IRR. Every single project has to have an IRR greater than 30%. And in most cases, they're well in excess of 100%. We don't sponsor sporting events or rally cars. We focus very much on building plants, getting plants to market, and driving the business forwards.
Sorry, I'm chuckling at the rally car joke. I know exactly where that's coming from. Paul, 1 or 2 of the more technical questions in my DMs that I'm going to attempt here. Bearing in mind, I'm definitely not a chemical engineer. There are a couple of questions around, I hope I'm saying it right. I think you said it as Itabum. Or close. 176 sounds like a wellness herb out of Notuk. It's
Yeah,
definitely.
Ytterbium 176.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Terbium. I'll remember that this time.
Starts with a Y.
Still sounds like a wellness herb out of Notuk, but obviously isn't. The questions are around why. So the one question is why the samples for this taking a bit longer. There seem to be some concerns in my DMs just around delays, maybe some rumors around even redesigns here someone's raised. I'll just open it to you to just talk to, just addressing these questions. I've got like 4 of them on why the samples of this are taking longer.
Yeah, so at the moment, they're in the producing samples. It takes a long time to produce the first batch. Subsequent batches are much quicker because we have to produce a huge amount of intermediates with lower levels of enrichment, and they go back in to become the feedstock for the next one. So listen, it just takes time. I think I see here the question saying the second stage could be done in 2 days. I think actually it's done probably in 8 hours, actually, quite frankly. So, but you need to spend a lot of time building up the intermediates to get there, and that's what they're doing at the moment. And it'll be ready when it's ready. In terms of redesigns and stuff, our first version of our plant won't be the final version of our plant. We're always improving bits, driving efficiencies, and that kind of stuff. So listen, the plant is going fine. It's producing commercial samples, and we'll add more production vessels to it to increase the capacity. Over the next sort of few months.
There's also a question here around carbon production and availability of feedstock. I mean, that's something that you referenced earlier. I think there's almost a broader question around just these supply chain risks on feedstock. How do you manage the business to get around or to mitigate these risks as best you can? I mean, it sounds like it's just one of the risks you face, right?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, listen, most of the feedstocks are freely available. So silane, which we use for silicon-28, you can just buy it in China or Linde or Air Products or Air Liquide. So that's freely available. Ytterbium metal is buy it from a US supplier and it gets shipped to us. So they're easy. The feedstock that's challenging is carbon-14 because that there aren't many places in the world that has carbon-14, and that feedstock comes from a CANDU reactor. CANDU reactor is a Canadian reactor, and a resin comes out of there that contains carbon-14 at 0.5%. And so our Canadian customer takes that resin, takes it to Tennessee, and gasifies the resin into carbon dioxide gas. They can then ship that carbon dioxide gas to us. That's allowed on a plane. We then convert that carbon dioxide gas into methane. We enrich the methane from 0.5% to 85%, then convert it into a barium-containing barium carbonate, which is again, we ship that on a plane very easily. We can't ship methane on a plane. And that's the only challenging feedstock we have. Most of the materials are freely available. But yeah, you're right, it's been very frustrating with our Canadian partner. But listen, it is what it is. We didn't spend much on that plant. The carbon-14 plant only costs $1 million to build. And so to do $2.5 million a year in revenue from $1 million, or maybe even $5 million in revenues from a $1 million capex investment, we kind of think it's a pretty good return on capital.
Need to ask a question from a geopolitical standpoint because I think that's key. I mean, you put that graph up of the amount of the stuff that's manufactured by Russia. Obviously, Russia is an interesting global geopolitical animal in and of itself. What's happening on the other side of the world is also very interesting. I guess just how well placed do you think you are to actually capitalize from, the change in mood in Europe, I think, and perhaps how things are now behaving in the US? You've got Russia producing most of this stuff. Where do you see yourself? I mean, I would imagine it's positive, but I think it's good for you to just walk everyone through it.
Yeah, so the geopolitical divisions around the world are always changing. They have done for the last 30 years and will do for the next 30 years, So my thinking is one can't get married to one country. One has to be able to operate with many different countries. I would point out that isotopes from Russia have not been embargoed during the last 2 or 3 years. That's how essential they are to everyday life. So, and most of our customers are probably based in the United States. We've got a couple in Europe we're talking to. But I mean, I think we're in a good position geopolitically. Most of our customers don't care where they buy their isotopes from, as long as it's not Russia or China. And that puts South Africa in a great position.
Got a question here about US Enrichment Corp and laser isotope separation and how tricky it is and how they gave up on it 20 years ago after spending a lot of money. I guess the question, and I mean, I hope this question makes sense. Obviously, the technical stuff I don't understand, but what are you doing differently this time around? I guess it goes to that overall question people might feel about, what is the risk that this thing just doesn't work, in inverted commas, that the technology actually doesn't work?
Yeah, so listen, we actually had the people who did that enrichment work come to South Africa to visit us, along with as part of TerraPower, maybe a year and a half ago. So it's pretty amusing, actually. I mean, these guys are from the Midwest of America, so to them, global is kind of East Coast to West Coast. And coming to Africa, they weren't expecting to find nuclear scientists and nuclear physicists. In fact, we're sitting in a Pretoria restaurant on the first night, and they take their malarial pills. And I said, guys, you might get mugged, raped, or murdered, but you're not getting malaria here in Pretoria. You're 5,000 feet above sea level. But they had no idea of what kind of was going on down here. No real global vision for the world. Anyway, so they came to see what we did, and I think they're pretty impressed by what we're doing. What do we do differently to them? So first of all, lasers have moved on an awful lot in the last 30 years. The repetition rates, the power, the ability to do different things with them has changed hugely. Beam shaping has moved on an awful lot in the last 30 years. So we use Wits University, their structured light group. We sponsor a couple of PhDs and master students there to do our beam shaping for us. And again, shaping the beam is really critical to make it so that the wavelengths are correct in the correct form, correct shape. So that's kind of critical as well. And the spectroscopy's moved on as well. Again, we can enrich things that aren't in the ground state. They couldn't. So an awful lot's changed over the last 30 years. It's a bit like saying, planes and cars haven't changed in the last 30 years. They have a lot, and as has technologies. And I guess that's the main difference. But yeah, I'd also put out laser enrichment is challenging, very challenging. We have a lot of engineers dedicated to doing it.
There are a couple of questions here that I don't know if you'll really be able to add to over and above what you've already said, but I may as well ask them. Update on the TerraPower term sheet. Anything else that you can give people looking for? Obviously, trying to wangle whatever details they can get out of you. I'll let you decide whether to add anything or not.
Well, I mean, listen, we entered into a term sheet back in, I think, October of last year. As part of that term sheet, we gave them an exclusivity agreement whereby for a long period of time, which gives us time to negotiate definitive contracts. To put into perspective, these definitive contracts are likely going to be 250 pages worth of documents. I mean, this is a lawyer's dream come true. And so we're going through those processes at the moment. I think we're kind of fairly close to the end of it. There hasn't been many contentious issues as we've been going through them. And we'll let the market know as soon as they're signed.
There's a question that I appreciate the simplicity of. I think you did allude to it somewhat, but it's always good to just in the Q&A bring it to the fore again, which is just around your expectations of being cash flow positive and profitable. You did have an outlook slide. I seem to recall that you talked to cash flow positivity even this year. Was that correct? Is that still where you're at?
Yeah, so our operating cash burn to keep the company alive is about $15 million a year, $15 million a year. And that pays for 153 employees. It pays for our buildings, our energy costs. It pays for our research and development costs. It pays for our lawyers, our listing fees, our accountants, our auditors, everything you need to keep a US NASDAQ company going, plus its employees, about $15 million a year. So if we can, so in the second half of the year, as we start producing larger amounts of ytterbium and silicon-28 and carbon-14, and look at PET Labs growing from maybe $4 to $6 million, we add all that lot up, kind of a pharmaceutical-like gross margin, we'd like to think we exit the year cash flow positive.
Got a question here about, I think you pronounce it as HALEU. It's the fuel, obviously, for nuclear. And there was a mention there that SMR companies are basing their business plans around a cost of less than $10,000 per kilo, but the current ore cost is already quite close to that and rising. The question is just around, is this a concern for the SMR industry? I guess what would that mean for you ultimately if it did start to tip above the levels their business plans are expecting?
Yeah, so I think for the really small SMRs, these like 1 megawatts, they're probably not possible at $20,000 a kilo, is my guess, but we'll see. For the much larger reactors, the 70 megawatts, the 100 megawatts, the 300 megawatts, maybe the cost of energy, the levelized cost of energy goes from 4 cents to 5 cents. That's still very cheap. So it's not a it shouldn't be a huge impact, but clearly, you know, it's it's not going in the right direction for them. So, and am I concerned about it? No. We have demand for customers, interest from customers, over $37 billion of HALEU over the next 12 years, and their economics are largely unaffected by these higher prices.
Nice technical question for you again from the chemical engineering enthusiast. A recent research report alluded to the benefits of enriching erbium-168 to produce what I'm guessing is lutetium, if I'm saying it right. Are there any plans to enrich that isotope?
So say the question again.
So it's there was a recent research report that alluded to the benefits of enriching erbium, that's erbium-168, to produce, I'm probably saying it wrong, is it lutetium, lutetium? Yeah. Are there plans to enrich that?
Yeah. Okay, so it's actually ytterbium-176 into lutetium-177. And yes, we're already enriching ytterbium-176.
Okay, there we go. I'm just skimming through. We've probably got time for maybe one more at most, and there are a lot here, unfortunately, but I'm going to ask this one. So, because I think this is a nice sort of strategy question. What sort of synergies are there across the various isotope extraction pipelines? Can they share equipment? Can they share technologies? Do you have to kind of go and build one thing that does one isotope, or, you know, can you share stuff? It's a good question.
So our laser plants are actually very flexible. The problem is when we get a laser for a plant, we have to sign an end user certificate stating exactly what it's enriching and exactly what building it's going to be in and what configuration it's going to be. And that's absolutely, so we're not allowed to put anything into that plant other than what we said we're going to put into that plant. And the IAEA can come around, they do come around, they take swabs in our rooms to make sure we're not enriching anything we have not got permission to enrich in there. So whilst in theory the laser plants are very flexible, in practice they're not. That said, the capital cost is also quite low, and so it's less of a concern. ASP plants are semi flexible. So, you know, our silicon-28 plant is very good for isotopes that have got a mass between, say, 15 and 80, but it couldn't do something outside, 200 or 300. Also, the ASP plants, the back end of the plant, the balancer plant, has slightly different ways of bringing them out of the carrier gas. So again, that's quite specific too. But there's some flexibility to our ASP plants. So, for example, our silicon plant could do silicon-28, germanium-70, and probably zinc, probably xenon as well.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful session. I always think when I read junior mining updates on the JSE that I wish I understood more about mining engineering. I'm definitely going to feel like I wish I understood more about chemistry every time I read the updates from you once you come to our market. But it's going to be lovely to have you on the JSE. We look forward to that listing, and to the attendees, thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't get to quite all of your questions. We do have a hard stop after an hour on this. But obviously, if you've got detailed questions, I'm sure if you submit them to the investor relations team, then they'll be able to answer the ones that they can. And for the ones that they can't, you'll have to wait for further company announcements. So, Paul, thank you so much for your time.
And if I could just have one closing remark, we're actually hosting an investor event at our facilities in June. So quite a few investors coming over from America and from Europe, and local investors who want to join us, then that's absolutely fine. And I'm guessing our bankers and brokers will deal with that accordingly.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you to everyone who chose to spend some time with us today in this session, and a special thank you to Paul and also to Johannes for making the time for this Retail Investor platform and to engage with investors. We hope that everyone has enjoyed this event. And if you want to listen to it again, please be reminded that it will be on our YouTube channel next week. We also would encourage you to subscribe to that channel because you can get the latest videos. Our next session is going to be hosted on Thursday, the 15th of May, and that will feature another regular to unlock the stock, which is Astoria. And that is all from our side. Goodbye.